It's the world's most popular assault rifle, a weapon all fighters love. An elegantly simple 9-pound amalgamation of forged steel and plywood. It doesn't break, jam, or overheat. It will shoot whether it's covered in mud or filled with sand. It's so easy, even a child can use it. And they do.
What's up guys, Skippy Africanus here, and in today's video we're going to be going over the Kastov 7.62 from Modern Warfare 2, or as it's much more commonly known in real life, the AK-47.
Oh, but Scipio, I saw a video from another guy talking about this gun, and he said it was actually the AK-103.
And you're right, this one specifically is the AK-103. But this one isn't. Neither is this one. That's actually an AK-104, and this is just flat out fucking perfection. And also not an AK-103. To be honest, you can build just about every AK variant on here to an extent, so while the base gun on here is the AK-103, that's not what everyone's running around with, so we're just gonna go over the AK-47 as a whole, not paying much mind to the variant specifically. As for the most part, the AK-103 really is just another AK-47 with some added polymer. So anyways, what is the AK-47? Why does it exist? How does it work? And more specific to this gun, as it's something that is routinely brought up when talking about it, was this thing really a copy of the World War II German Sturmgewehr 44? Let's get into it. The AK-47, also known as Automat Kalashnikova, assuming my Russian pronunciation is on point, we can just translate it to Kalashnikov's automatic, if that's not the case, is a long-stroke gas piston-operated, two-lug rotating bolt assault rifle invented by Mikhail Kalashnikov. They have two modes to them, automatic and semi-automatic, at least on the military variants. Obviously, the civilian variants will just have semi-automatic. And do note that there is an AK-103 variant, designated the AK-103-2, that actually does have a 3-round burst option. But for the most part, they either feature both full and semi-automatic for the military version, or semi-automatic, as stated before, for the numerous civilian versions. Development for the rifle technically began in 1945. However, the request that would lay the foundation for even developing the gun in the first place would start in 1943, when after experiencing the effectiveness of the German Sturmgewehr 44s, the Soviet Union would want to create something equally as effective. They would start off first with the creation of the intermediate cartridge, the 7.62 by 39mm. However, the AK-47 would not be the first rifle chambered for this cartridge. Rather, that would go to the SKS, which I know looks very similar to an AK, but these things are actually night and day. The SKS uses a completely different operating system. And funny enough, Kalashnikov would actually have a rifle submitted to the trials that would end up adopting the SKS. And much like the earlier submachine gun trials that he would end up losing, he also lost this one. However, despite losing both of these trials, this did help to get his name out there, and as they always say, try again, he tried again, and began development on the AK-47 in 1945. To which, by 1946, he submitted his rifle for another set of rifle trials, and this time won it out. It should be noted that the AKs he submitted, commonly referred to as AK-46s, looked a little different from the classic AKs we all know and love today, featuring a lot of different little things that would end up being removed from future AK rifles. Things like a separate safety and fire selector system as opposed to this one, a charging handle located on the left rather than the right side, a 2-part receiver. I mean, honestly, you just look at this thing and you can tell it's got some weird shit going on. Anyways, the rifle, note I'm talking AK-46, ended up completely acing the trials, which very shortly afterward is where you would see a bunch of the changes between the AK-46 and then the inevitable AK-47. But anyways, by 1947, they were initiating actual field trials for the rifle, and once it passed those, it would be given in small numbers to a select number of units, until in 1949, when the rifle was formally adopted by the Soviet Union, meaning mass production could begin. Now, while the AK is known as the perfect rifle that can survive anything from being dunked in mud to being run over by a tank and still run like nothing ever happened, this was not the case for the very early models. In fact, the rifle was plagued with an assortment of issues in its early days, which, to be fair, can and tends to happen with a lot of guns. However, they would tweak the gun here and there, switching from a stamped receiver to a milled one, going through many different magazine designs, all the common stuff that guns tend to go through during their early production. And one by one, they would just start to, stamp out the problems the gun was having. To which, it should be noted that by around 1959, they would adopt the AKM, which essentially is just an AK-47 with a stamped receiver. As I had just mentioned, the guns originally were intended to use a stamped receiver, but they had some issues with it, so they swapped over to a milled receiver, but they eventually worked out those issues and went back to the stamped receiver. And also, while on the topic, it should be noted that, yes, the gun changed names, but I'm still going to call it an AK-47, at least in reference to the guns chambered in 7.62 by 39, that is. is. Anyways, the Soviets would not be the only ones modifying their 47s. When the gun spread to other nations of the Warsaw Pact, as well as just other countries in general, it would see many different variants being developed with all kinds of neat little features. For instance, some went with a fully enclosed front sight post like on the Narenko models, some went with side folding or underfolding stocks as opposed to a fixed wood stock, and then some countries just flat out did this. But I'm getting a little too deep into this. Let's go into our next question on what actually caused the Soviet Union to even build this thing in the first place. Because at the time of this thing's development, there really was only one other gun like it. The idea of using intermediate cartridges was something that had been looked into many times, even well before the development of this thing, and while the concept itself wasn't anything new by the time they started looking into these, it certainly was still kind of an alien thing to do. Like hell, it sounds stupid nowadays looking back on Hitler's aversion to the development of the Sturmgewehr 44, but at the time there were some valuable questions being raised to challenge the concept of even having an intermediate cartridge in the first place. And would make a lot of countries just, not want to take the gamble on if the concept even, was an actual viable concept, so many of them just opted to continue using their, well, not really bolt actions, they would go to semi-automatics, but semi-automatic rifles and then submachine guns. That being said, the Germans got to do the gambling on whether or not it was a good idea, and the Soviets were left to face the muzzle of that good idea. Seeing the effectiveness of the STG-44's intermediate cartridge would cause the Soviets to race to getting something similar to it. Now, that being said, a common statement made is that the AK-47 really is just a copy of the German STG-44. And while it is undeniable that the STG-44 influenced the creation of the AK-47, how close are these two rifles really from one another? Well, before we answer that question, let's get into how the AK-47 itself actually works, over on the IRL cam. So the way these work is actually very simple. No surprise, AKs are referred to as very simple rifles. As the bullet is fired, gas follows right behind it and is vented up into this gas tube. And sitting inside that tube is the long stroke piston. So as the gas is vented through the tube, it begins to push on the piston, causing the rest of the bolt carrier to move rearwards. Now the bolt head itself is not going to move rearwards just yet. It has to actually unlock, and as this bolt carrier is moving rearwards, there's actually a tract in there, and this little piece runs along that tract. So as the bolt carrier begins to move rearwards, it is forcing that bolt head to slowly rotate until it is clear from all metal blocking it into the receiver, and it is allowed to go right back, sent right forward via the recoil spring in the back. This bolt rotates right back in position, and you're ready to fire the next shot. So that's how the AK-47, as well as practically all AK-style rifles, work for that matter. Now, that still begs the question, does the STG-44 work in the same way? Or better yet, is the AK-47 a copy of the STG-44? To which the answer to that question is a definite no. Like, sure, these guns may look the same, or at least to some people. Like, personally, I can see, like, some resemblance, but they look pretty darn different. But much like how I mentioned earlier with the SKS, the AK and STG-44 are very different from one another. Like, the only things they really have in common are they're both long stroke gas piston operated, and they both use stamped receivers, or at least a portion of AKs use stamped receivers. As mentioned before, some use milled, but I mean, I guess the ammunition looks pretty similar too, but all in all, that's about all they have in common with one another. Now, the big difference between the two is the way the STG-44 itself operates, as opposed to the two-lug rotating bolt mentioned earlier. It actually uses a tilting bolt, actually something very similar to what the SKS uses. And add to that, the gun also just in general has a bunch of minor differences with it, such as a button-style bolt release on the side, the receiver coming out in two parts. Like, honestly, the AK is about as different from this gun as it is from this one. But anyways, I think that is going to do it for this short little video on the Kastov 762 from Modern Warfare 2, or as it's much more commonly known in real life, the AK-47. I hope you all enjoyed the video as much as I personally enjoyed making it, and I hope to see you all in the next Modern Warfare 2 gun in real life video.